Hi, everyone. Welcome to Proudly Jewish, Conversations on Israel and Jewish Identity. I'm Cantor Eyal Bitton, Cantor of Congregation Neveh Shalom in Portland, Oregon. And I started this podcast just a few weeks after the October 7th massacre as a way for people I know, for myself, for members of my congregation to grapple with what we had just witnessed. And here we are, 6 months later. This past Sunday was 6 months to the day, April 7th, 6 months since October 7th. And I thought I would take a look at where it started and where we are now. Since October 7th, Jewish people have been reeling. The massacre itself and the ensuing eruption of antisemitism throughout the States, Canada, England, France, Australia, and elsewhere has shaken us and has, I would say, forever changed us. With everything that's been going on lately, the demonstrations, the rallies, UN vote, politics, the war, there's been an effort, I think, to shift the narrative, pull focus from October 7th. So with all of that, I thought it's important to look back to that central moment and remember what October 7th signified for us, for world Jewry. The October 7th massacre shook us to the core. It shook our foundations. It evoked within us, within the Jewish conscience, echoes of the Holocaust. You see on social media people saying, never again is now. There's a reason for that, right? We got that there was something about the Holocaust that was being channeled on October 7th, right? Something genocidal, a genocidal intent. We witnessed a willingness to wipe us out, and in the most intimate and inhumane way. These Palestinian terrorists from Hamas came into our towns, to Israeli towns, into communities, into kibbutzim, into people's homes, and they did the most horrendous things to people in front of their family members, parents in front of their children, children in front of their parents. We saw the governing Palestinian group of Gaza gleefully engaging in the most heinous acts against Jews of all ages, and others as well. I would suspect that most of you, like me, in your entire lifetime, you've never seen the sorts of shocking and revolting acts seen in the images and videos provided by the perpetrators themselves. I know I've never seen anything like that. We saw that our Jewish homeland's existence remains precarious, even in 2023 and into 2024. Many Jews in the US learned that the crux of the Palestine-Israel conflict is not actually about borders, not actually about settlements, but about Israel's very existence. From October 8th, one day after the massacre, until now, we've seen pro-Palestinian, or better described as anti-Israel protests and demonstrations. They're not protests against any single event or activity. Many people may think that these are protests against the war or some other issue, but they're ignoring what the protesters have been saying all along. Take a listen to what people at these protests were saying on October 8th. Watch.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Free, free Palestine. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free. Palestine will be free.
what we heard at these protests on October 8th, one day after the massacre, is no different from protests we see today. In fact, they've gotten worse and more intimidating. They're emboldened, I would say, by the support they've gotten from so many people and institutions and from the media. They've gone on to target Jewish schools, Jewish neighborhoods, and synagogues, even the synagogue I grew up in Montreal, the Spanish and Portuguese. On October 8th, and in protest today in 2024, they call for the same thing, for Israel to be wiped out. They may use various euphemisms, mainly from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. But the message is clear, no Israel. So they're saying, no Israel. Now here's the thing. They were galvanized on day one of Hamas's brutal massacre. They were not responding to Israel's response. They were hitting the streets on October 8th. Why? Why did they come out on October 8th? Because they were excited about what they had just seen. Because they thought, and they understood what this war was about. They understood what the October 7th massacre was about. And they thought, this is our chance to destroy Israel. So they joined in. Hamas, Hezbollah, and other Iranian proxies are targeting Israel militarily, but these members of the Free Palestine movement could target Israel in the PR world, and by doing everything they can to pressure leaders in the West to abandon Israel at all levels, companies, shopkeepers, universities, mayors, governors, and beyond. We Jews and many others were utterly horrified as we watched videos and images of atrocities, the likes of which we have never seen. And while we were utterly horrified, the Free Palestine activists and supporters were galvanized and exhilarated. Exhilarated. They made it clear that they fully support the actions committed by Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and many Palestinian civilians who joined in the modern-day pogrom. Even if they did not say the words, and they have, some of them have, but even if they did not say the words, we stand with Hamas, they never objected. They never took to the streets to say not in our name. They never protested the hostages being taken. In fact, they expressed that they fully back the aim of Hamas from the river to the sea, the eradication of the Jewish state. Seeking the destruction of the Jewish state is anti-Semitic. In fact, it's extremely anti-Semitic. Not only would the destruction of the Jewish state look exactly or worse than what we saw on October 7th on a huge scale, it would result in the massive ethnic cleansing and genocide of half the world's Jewish population, over 7 million Jews. And what shocked many of us is the degree of support the anti-Israel movement garnered. What shocked many of us is how so many people we thought were friends were actually on the side of the Hamas terrorists who perpetrated the worst atrocities committed against Jews since the Holocaust. Former friends who proved to be anti-Semitic. Former friends who had the audacity to tell us who is a good Jew and who is a bad Jew. We watch feminist groups and others ignore, dismiss, excuse, or even deny the use of rape as a weapon in that nightmarish Palestinian onslaught against Israeli civilians. Against women, against girls, against men. It's 6 months after the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust, and the war on Israel continues today. So that's where we are, 6 months later. It's continuing. The war to destroy Israel continues, not just over there in Gaza, right here. Many people think, particularly in the Ceasefire Now campaign, that what we've been seeing for the last 6 months is Israel's war on Hamas in Gaza, but I don't think that's accurate. October 7th was an invasion of sovereign Israeli territory by a regime whose very charter calls for the destruction of Israel and the Jewish people. A war was launched by Hamas on October 7th. And as I mentioned earlier, the Free Palestine movement joined the war effort in the Western battlefield of PR, in arts and culture, in economics, in politics. A movement, this Free Palestine movement, has the same goal of destroying the Jewish state. And that war is what we're seeing on campuses, is what we're seeing on our streets. And they're gaining ground. They're gaining ground. How many institutions and political leaders have changed their tune with respect to sympathy or support for Israel? That's happened over the last 6 months. We hear more and more about the number of dead in Gaza. This is never an issue in other wars. The conversation has never been the US has to stop its campaign against ISIS. Too many casualties. The US has to stop its campaign against Iraq. Too many casualties. The US and the UK have to stop their campaign against the Germans. Too many casualties on the German side. It's not a thing. The Ceasefire Now folks, along with much of the media, oddly trust the numbers being handed to them by Hamas. They claim that 30,000 Palestinians have been killed. They're outraged by that number, even though it's unlikely to be an accurate number. There's no reason to trust Hamas. They're outraged by that number, even though almost half of them are Hamas and Islamic Jihad fighters. And what does that tell you? It tells me that they consider Hamas fighters to be innocent. And they are outraged that Hamas members have been killed, even though Israel has stunned the military world by its remarkably low civilian to combatant ratio. Listen to expert on urban warfare and other military topics, John Spencer.
From what I've observed in the field, watching the IDF, plus over a decade of studying this type of combat, the IDF nobody's acknowledged that the IDF are actually doing this with the least amount of civilian care in the history of war in the context of these type of operations. And listened to international condemnation since the beginning of the war and did it differently from the way they started the war. So how they operated in northern Gaza versus how they operated in central Gaza were vastly different. Some of that's based on the enemy, but they cut civilian casualties by a half and then by 2/3 to where now it's at an abnormally low for even combat in general.
There's no military in the world who has faced the challenge that Israel is facing right now in the war against Hamas. An entire underground war where the enemy is using the civilian population as its strategy to try to get the other side to stop moving forward for their military strategic objective. No military has faced a military who is shooting at its civilians behind them in the midst of the operation. Because of the 13,000 Hamas rockets, 100% of those have been dumb. They do not have precision-guided ammunition. Nobody's talking about that statistic.
We have to take note of the fact that the Ceasefire Now folks have no expectations of Hamas. They expect Israel to just stop. They expect Israel to leave Hamas in power. Just a day or two ago, Hamas rejected yet another offer for a ceasefire. Hamas doesn't want a ceasefire, but the Ceasefire Now crowd is fine with that. They don't care if Hamas says no. They don't care about that at all. The onus for them is not on Hamas. They don't want that. They want Israel to just stop. They want an Israeli surrender. They expect Israel to leave Hamas in power. They expect Israel to leave their citizens who are being held hostage behind. In other words, they are fine. The Ceasefire Now crowd are fine with Israeli men, women, and children being kept in captivity, where they're being tortured and sexually assaulted. They're fine with each and every one of those innocent people being held by Hamas. That's what ceasefire now means. It means demanding Israel stop trying to get their civilians back. It means leaving those hostages in the hands of Hamas. Now, something that many of us have forgotten, and it's worth remembering, is this. Congresswoman Cori Bush introduced a Ceasefire Now resolution on October 16th. Let me repeat that. She introduced a Ceasefire Now resolution on October 16th, 9 days after the massacre occurred. 9. Israel hadn't yet sent their ground troops into Gaza, and she was calling for a ceasefire. The goal has always been to stop Israel from defending itself. The goal has always been to prevent Israel from removing Hamas. The goal was never to free the hostages. This resolution to handcuff Israel, to discard the hostages, and hand Hamas a victory was co-sponsored by several others, including Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Ilhan Omar. The campaign, here we are 6 months later, the campaign, the Ceasefire Now campaign, has gained traction over the months. Even the Biden administration has moved in that direction. They let a ceasefire, call for a demand for a ceasefire by the UN pass. And they themselves have changed their rhetoric, calling for ceasefire. I, for one, don't believe that this change in policy over the last 6 months is because of the loss of life or humanitarian aid or whatever they might be saying. I believe it's because of domestic and political pressure. There's an election coming. These protests have been successful. And this worries me. Will the American government's support for its ally Israel continue? Some say that they've already abandoned Israel. There are critics out there that are saying that the Biden administration has abandoned Israel, that they've handed Hamas a victory and pressured Netanyahu and his government to stop, to cease fire now and end this war now. Some say, on the other hand, that it's only rhetoric, that this is rhetoric to help win an election and perhaps other motives, but that in reality, in the ways that matter, by the Biden administration will continue to support Israel. Time will tell. The anti-Semitic Free Palestine protests, that's what they are. The anti-Semitic Free Palestine protests are not fueled by a drive to forge peaceful coexistence between Palestinians and Israelis. They're fueled by a desire to destroy Israel. They're on a warpath right alongside Hamas. That's why they were out on the streets on October 8th. The good news about this, if there are any, the good news is that if they're on a warpath to destroy Israel, I believe the atmosphere will calm down. These hostile protests will die down when they realize that they've lost, when they realize that the campaign to destroy Israel has failed. Things will calm down, but we Jews will have learned to what extent anti-Semitism still exists around us. We will have learned that anti-Semitism is something we can no longer afford to be blind to, whether it comes from the right, from the left, or from elements in the Muslim world, or anywhere else. We will have learned that American support for the Jewish state is not as solid as it perhaps once was. Now, I do have a positive outlook for the future. And it remains the same as it was immediately after October 7th. Listen to what I had to say back then.
When the dust settles, I know we're far from it right now, but when the dust settles, Israel will win. And Hamas will lose. Hamas will have won nothing, will have achieved nothing, will have given the Palestinian people nothing. But Israel will be safer, Israel will be stronger, and Israel will grow. Thousands, mark my words, thousands of Jews from around the world are going to make Aliyah. Jews from France, from the UK, from Canada, from the States, from Australia are going to look around and ask themselves, is this place really safe for us? How many friends, colleagues, institutions, schools, politicians were ready to abandon me and ready to abandon my people and let there be another genocide, if not even applaud it? How many? Is this place really safe for us? And they're going to ask themselves that question, and they're going to make Aliyah to Israel. So Israel will grow. And Israel will make peace with even more Arab countries. Israel will be safer. Israel will be stronger. Israel will grow.
So once again, I believe that once Israel dismantles Hamas as the governing body of Gaza, I believe they will do that. And then once they remove Hamas as a viable threat to Israel, three things will happen. Israel will be safer, Israel will be at peace, and Israel will grow. Israel will be safer because the deterrent will be set once more, because they will have removed the immediate threat, genocidal threat of Hamas. Israel will make peace with more Arab countries, with Saudi Arabia. And that will change the landscape hugely. The Sunni world will be at peace with Israel, the Sunni Muslim world. And Israel will grow. It's happening now. Jews from all kinds of places where antisemitism has been erupting will realize and have realized that these places are not safe for them, and they want to be in the Jewish homeland. So Israel will grow. They'll make Aliyah. Not all Jews, but many will. With the likely prospect of war with Iranian proxy Hezbollah, I don't think that this is over. The war with Hamas may end very soon, but it looks like there's another war. There's a war right now with Hezbollah, but a full-out war, I think, is likely with Hezbollah in the near future, and possibly with Iran itself. So with that on the horizon, the road ahead is a long one, but Israel will prevail. The Jewish people need Israel to prevail. Our future, our destiny, is intrinsically tied to the destiny of the Jewish state. And whether we deserve it or not, I believe that world Jewry will be safer as a result of Israel's second war of independence, this war of existence, this existential war. I believe that world Jewry will be safer as a result of Israel letting our enemies know that we're here to stay and that we are a nation among the family of nations. Am Israel Chai.